Okay, everyone, welcome. I'm Katie Freeman, and on behalf of Mystery Writers of America, welcome to the 78th Annual Edgar Award Symposiums. Today's discussion is with the nominees for the J.P. Putnam Sons Sue Grafton Memorial Award. Our moderator is RJ Koreto, and who I'll be introducing in a minute. You can learn more about Mystery Writers of America and the Edgar Awards by following us on social media using the hashtag Edgars2024 and by visiting the websites mysterywriters.org and edgarawards.com. And I suggest you check both of them out. Reminder that the Edgar Awards will be live streamed on our YouTube channel on May 1st, which is coming right up. And during today's discussion, I will be posting links to our panelists' books in the chat. You can get books anywhere books are available, including the library, but we're featuring the bookstore today, Mystery Loves Company in Oxford. Okay. Please feel free to submit questions. Very welcome to submit questions in the Q&A box throughout the conversation, and we'll get to them towards the end of the hour. And now to introduce our moderator. RJ Koreto has published 7 mystery novels, and his short stories have appeared in Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine, Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine as well, lots of mystery magazines, 2 of the best, and the 2020 BoucherCon Anthology. So thank you very much, Richard, for moderating today. Congratulations to all of the nominees, and welcome everyone to this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Terrific. Well, I'm glad we could all be here today, and I'm looking forward to everyone hearing about your books. I thought we'd first just go around the room and everyone tell a little bit about your books and particularly your protagonist, because this is all in in honor and memory of Sue Grafton. That's such a wonderful protagonist, and a chance to talk about all your protagonists. So I'm just gonna go around the room, so to speak. Sarah, why don't you start first?
Sure. Thank you so much, RJ. And it's such a thrill to be here with all of you. Val and Samantha and Susan and Linda, you are all people I look up to. So this is just such a thrill. So I write the Maggie Darcy series, which is about an American homicide detective in Ireland. And in the first book in the series, The Mountains Wild, Maggie has to go to Ireland from her home on Long Island to try to find her cousin, her beloved cousin, who has disappeared not far from Dublin in the mountains. Yeah. And over the course of the now 4-book series, Maggie, the experiences that she has looking for Aaron in Ireland sort of explode her life, reverberate throughout her life in various ways. And in A Stolen Child, I gotta get the everything's opposite. In A Stolen Child, which is the 4th book in the series, Maggie and her daughter are finally living in Dublin with Maggie's Irish boyfriend, and she's working as a guard at long last. And she and her new partner respond to a possible domestic violence situation. They leave, reassured that everything's okay. And then a couple of days later are called back when the woman who lives in the apartment is found murdered. Not only do they have a homicide on their hands, but the woman's toddler daughter is missing, and they are in the middle of a manhunt to try to find the young mother's killer so they can find her daughter as well.
Great. That's exciting. Susan, why don't you go next?
I have Corey Geller is the name of my detective. I decided after about 45 years to do a series. And so now I'm doing it. Bad Seymour Brown is the name of the second book. I'm now working on the 3rd. And it's about Corey is a former retired FBI agent. She's in her late 30s. Her dad is a really retired NYPD homicide detective. And they've worked together in the past, but this time somebody actually hires them to investigate a case. The daughter of Bad Seymour, murdered 20 years earlier, wants to know, I was 5 years old when he was killed. Why does someone want to kill me now?
Great. Great. Samantha, let's hear about your book.
Hi, thank you. And it's so awesome to be here with all of you. I love all your books. My protagonist of the series is Annie McIntyre. The first book in the series, Pay Dirt Road, introduces Annie. She's a 22-year-old recent college graduate, and she doesn't know what she wants to do with her life. She ends up back in her small hometown in Texas, and she's waitressing, and one of her coworkers goes missing, and she ends up working for her retired sheriff grandfather, who now runs a private investigation firm, and his former partner in the sheriff's office. And that kind of launches the series. And the second book, Hard Rain, it takes place a few months after the event of the first book, and there's been a horrific flood. It's set in Central Texas, and that's kind of the kind of a feature of living there, unfortunately. But this flood turns up a former friend of Annie's, and she is hired to look into who saved her from the flood, and ends up finding a murder victim instead, and that kind of kicks off the story.
Great. Val, let's hear from you.
Hi there. It's lovely to be here amongst you all. I wish we were all in the flesh together, but distance
Yeah.
lends
That would be
enchantment, as they say. My book, Past Lying, features my cold case detective, Karen Perry. I have a few different series going on at the time, but Karen runs the cold case, the historic cases unit for Police Scotland. It's a very small unit because it's a very small force, really, great in the greater scheme of things. Anyway, it's book set in lockdown for COVID-19, as the previous book, Still Life, finished just as COVID was emerging. And so I felt at the time I couldn't write about lockdown in the thick of it. So finally, it's time to come back to it afterwards. So Karen and her colleagues are in lockdown. They're all in their apartments by themselves, and they're struggling to occupy themselves because they can't really go out and do much investigating. But what happens is that one of the librarians in the National Library of Scotland is troubled by something she came across in the archive before lockdown started. And she phones Karen's colleague to tell him that she read this unfinished manuscript by a recently deceased crime writer that seems to be a blueprint for a recent case of a young student who disappeared in Edinburgh. The case was unresolved, and then, of course, lockdown happened and everything got put on the back burner. So Karen thinks this might be worth taking a look at, if only to act as a kind of training exercise for her team, not really expecting it to go anywhere. And so she starts investigating this, and it takes the form of, because it's got this partial manuscript, a book within a book, which she tries to map onto the real case. And this leads them into all sorts of interesting areas and uncovers the secret life of crime writers.
Great. And Linda.
Hi, everybody. I am so
Hi.
thrilled to be here. Sue Grafton, I mean, how cool is it to be here talking about our books in memorial? But anyway, I write the Kate Burkholder Amish mystery series. An Evil Heart was out, of course, last summer. I can't believe it was the 15th book in the series, which is incredibly hard to believe. But I think sort of what sets the series apart is that it's set in Ohio. I live in Texas. I'm originally from Ohio, and Kate Burkholder was born Amish. And she left the Amish after something devastating event happened to her when she was 14 years old. And she left when she was 18. She didn't fit in. She had a lot of problems with the belief system, and left when she was 18, moved to Columbus, found her way into law enforcement. And when the chief of police position came up back in her hometown of Painters Mill, she decided to go back, and she accepted the position. And so it's, one of the things I absolutely love about writing crime fiction with that kind of setting is that there's a real juxtaposition between, this beautiful bucolic setting of, small town Ohio, especially Amish country, and then the introduction of something evil into that setting. But my nominated book, I don't know if you can see it, is An Evil Heart. And I think, one of the things I love about this book, if you've read any of the books, that they usually start with a very brutal murder. These, even though the books are Amish set, they're not cozy. And there's a lot of, the Amish tend to be somewhat of a closed society. And, even with Kate having been born Amish, there's a little bit of a wall there, especially between the Amish and the government, and especially the English and the police department. And so she's got a lot of digging to do. The book basically starts with the young Amish man riding his bicycle to work, and he's shot with a crossbow. And that's sort of, Kate gets the call out, heads over to the scene, and that's sort of how the story opens.
Great. Great. I know my wife is from Pennsylvania, so she has a knowledge of that. She'd often talk about that. Thank you. Okay, and I'd like to go into, in addition to the wonderful characters Sue Grafton had, I found, and I read all her books, a very rich thematic development there, the themes of the stories, everything for you to love, jealousy, all those things. And I thought we'd have a chance to talk about which themes in your book resonate with you. What themes do you find yourself coming back to again and again that you particularly like putting on paper? We'll go in another order now. Susan, why don't you lead off?
Okay. Well, themes, I mean, I think in terms, characters come to me first, and they say, come on, tell my story. But then you have to put them in a world. Otherwise, they're just paper dolls with, named professions. So what I like to do is to create an entire universe for them. And in order to do that, in order to have the world, you have to have, I think some of the themes I explore are evil, or what's it like to be beautiful? Is that a hazard or an asset? Like wither woman. I mean, what if you're a woman who loves intellectual adventure, but who's never done anything much in her life? I mean, since I began writing fiction, the world has changed in a tremendous way. Even the end of the 20th century, I wrote my one nonfiction book called Brave Dames and Wimpettes, What Women Are Doing on Page and Screen. And it was all about why the women in books and movies weren't as strong as the women I've met in real life. But again, it's that idea is gone. I mean, you look at everything from the women with the pink pussy hats to the women in Iran who rose up against the government. It's amazing, and I'm fascinated by all that's inside and what comes out and when.
Great. Linda, you can talk about a little bit about your important themes.
I love themes, and I think when I first started writing, that was actually one of the most difficult things for me to understand. I think I understood it as a writer on an instinctive level when I was writing, but I sort of almost couldn't put it into words. And sometimes I know the theme when I start a book. Sometimes I struggle with it and I don't know right away. And sometimes the characters really have to show me the way. But when, for example, the books are set among the Amish, and, the Amish are generally, they're good people, good neighbors. But one of the things that I always try to show is that they're also human beings, and they are prone to all of the same frailties as the rest of us. And I love that theme. And, every book has a different theme. Some of them have similar themes. When you think about rules, when you think about the Amish and you think about all of their rules, sometimes the theme is something like freedom or, not fitting in. Is it okay not to fit in? How much of yourself do you have to sacrifice to be your true self and not fit in with the rest of the group? Facades also. For example, that was really one of the themes of An Evil Heart. People sometimes are not what they appear to be. And after, Kate Burkholder does some digging, she really starts to discover that things are not anything like what she envisioned. So I love themes now.
Great. Val, why don't you share with us?
Well, I tend to think that I don't know what the theme of a book is till I've finished writing it.
That's great.
I start off with an idea for the story and the characters, and out of that, the theme emerges, I suppose. But I often think it's dangerous to start off with an idea of what the theme is going to be, what this book, the message of this book is going to be, because you can get bogged down in that instead of telling the story and getting to know the characters and letting them tell their story. But I suppose if there is a theme in the Karen Puri novels, it is her absolute dedication to bringing answers home to people who have lost people they love and don't have the answers, don't know what happened to them. They're left in a kind of limbo. And she also deals, I think, with how you deal with questions of grief, how you come through that and out the other end of it, how you put your life back together. She's got her own experiences of personal grief earlier in the series. This is the 7th book, currently writing the 8th one. And this idea for Karen about finding the answers that give people not so much closure, but a sense of understanding what happened to the person they loved, how did they come to their end, what happened to bring this end about. So I guess that's at the heart of the books. But I'm also concerned with the idea of investigating the past. I'm interested also in looking at cold cases because it allows you to write about the recent past, and often it's things that happened that are historically significant, but we forget about them. For example, 10 years ago, I wrote a book called The Skeleton Road, which is set against the Balkan conflicts of the 1990s. And at the time I was writing it, it was as if we'd forgotten that had even happened. It had become just something that was in the distant past. So that's, I suppose, part of what I'm trying to do as well, which is to kind of excavate the things we've forgotten.
Great. Samantha, why don't you share?
Yes. Kind of actually piggybacking on what Linda was talking about with not fitting in. I think that, and when we were thinking about Sue Grafton's themes too, that kind of was coming together in my mind, is that loneliness and kind of being a misfit is a really common theme in private eye novels and detective stories, and certainly influenced my work too. That kind of feeling of being on the outside a little bit and not happy with the status quo. I think that usually lends a character to some kind of like both personal journey and action. And that's certainly the case for Annie McIntyre. She is young. She's kind of trying to figure out who she is. And the novels are coming of age novels, really, in a lot of ways. And she feels a lot of tension between the past and the present in her hometown, love and hate, also with her relationships with her family members. Her grandfather, she loves him, she reveres him, but he's also kind of a complicated, erratic figure and very eccentric. And so that kind of unevenness, I think, is a big theme. I guess ambivalence between loving and hating a place and parts of yourself is big in the Annie McIntyre series. And In Hard Rain specifically, it's a lot about faith in different ways. There's a church subplot, but like more broadly, it's about bad things happen, like a horrific flood, a catastrophic event that you don't have any control over, and kind of trusting yourself to make it right or to continue to weather whatever may happen is something that Annie has to figure out for herself in this book.
Great. Great. And Sarah.
Yeah, I agree with Val that usually my themes don't sort of emerge from the muck and the mud of the book until I've gotten to the end of it, and I've sort of it's almost after I've put it to bed that I start to realize, oh, this is what I was trying to write about. This is what was going on.
Right.
And in the first Maggie Darcy book, when Maggie's cousin Erin goes missing, Maggie becomes really sort of obsessed with her memories of Erin and trying to sort of go back and piece the shards of her memories together. And she feels if she can do this, she might be able to figure out where Erin went or what happened to her. And the book is really about Maggie realizing that her memories are not always to be trusted, and that when your memories are incomplete, you can't make a full picture of someone, that maybe you've missed the really important part. And so, I think I sort of started the series with this idea about exploring memory and the fallibility of our memories and how we use memory to try to put together our ideas of who the people we love are. And as the series has gone on, I've realized that in a lot of ways I'm really writing about home and finding a place to call home. The series is very much inspired by my own time as an American living in Ireland and sort of, experiencing that sense of loving a place, but never fully belonging to it, and always feeling like, as Samantha said, that sense of always feeling like an outsider, which is kind of a natural for detective fiction. And so I think, there are themes of immigration and heritage, but ultimately, I think this sense of home and what is home, and can you make home? Can you create home when you've been separated from your home?
Oh, that's great. That is interesting. That kind of leads into the next item too. I'm glad you touched on setting, because that's a fascinating thing. We all have very different settings here. And I'm curious to know how everyone looks at that, settings of their books, whether it's something they know from their childhood or adulthood, or whether it's the place they visited and how they bring it to life and what makes it interesting for them. Val, why don't you lead off on this?
For me, settings are a really crucial part of any novel. And I think it's one of the things we do as crime writers that's like playing a trick on the readers almost. Everybody knows that crimes are not solved the way we write about them in our books. It's not how police operate. It's not how private eyes even operate. So we have to convince the readers to come with us on this journey where we get them to suspend their disbelief and trust us. And I think one of the ways that we can do this is with a sense of place. If I write about a town or a city or a landscape that the reader recognizes as being someplace they know, and they think, oh yeah, she's got that right, I've been in that cafe, or it corresponds to some kind of district in your own city, a landscape you've walked through, and you think, oh yeah, I remember that. That's a bit like those mountains we went to see. You immediately start to trust what else I'm telling you. So it's like if I give you a credible backdrop, then you think, oh, she knows what she's talking about, this woman. I'll believe all the rest of the lies. So that's kind of part of what it is. But I tend to set my novels in places that I know pretty well, either because I've lived there or I've spent a lot of time there. There's always sort of, as it were, walk-on locations that you have to slot in because you need a particular landscape or
Yeah.
a particular element. But on the whole, it's places that I've lived in and that I know pretty well. So the Karen Pirie novels are mostly set in Scotland, in Fife initially, because she starts off as an officer in Fife, and then she becomes the Police Scotland historic cases person. So that covers the whole country. So she gets to go all over Scotland to different landscapes, cityscapes, ruralscapes, seascapes. But also there are times when she finds herself abroad as well. So she's been to France, amongst other places. She's been to Ireland. So she gets around a bit, but it's always places that I know well enough to describe without having to sort of think, oh, I must go on a research trip to that place because it sounds interesting. But sometimes, I don't know if you guys have had the same experience. Sometimes you go a place and you just think, I have to write about this place. This is too good to ignore. And Robert Louis Stevenson said this about an inn in South Queensferry in Scotland near Edinburgh. He said, it's a place that cries out for murder. And I'm sure you've all had that experience. You go a place and you think, this would be a great setting, a perfect place to find a body. So the sense of place is important. I like to have a backdrop in my head, but the better I know it, the more comfortable I feel.
Great. Great. Linda, why don't you tell us a little bit about yours?
Val, I loved everything that you said. It is so true. And I think it really does. Sometimes when you can lay out a vivid setting, it gives, credibility to the liar. And I think that readers more apt to buy into other aspects of the story. With the Kate Burkholder series and An Evil Heart, most of my stories are rural. They're set in rural areas and small town. I was born and raised in a town with a population of 79. I think we have 2 stop signs now in that town up in Ohio. So, and I actually touched on this earlier. Amish country, Ohio is a very beautiful place. It's very peaceful. It's a farming community, a lot of farming. There are a lot of Amish. I mean, you can drive down they've got a scenic byway that runs through Holmes County. And, you have to be careful with, a lot of Amish buggies. You can, horses, a lot of horses and buggies. You can't be in too much of a hurry. And, what I mentioned earlier, one of the things I really love about that is that juxtaposition. I tend to write, dark crimes and characters who, I know a lot of us do the same thing, but characters who are not what they seem. And it's always, you always want to surprise the reader with that. That's one of those things. If you have credibility, you can convince the reader that this character is good. And then when the truth comes out and they're surprised, it's a good thing. But, I think the main theme as far as setting for me is, rural and, that, bad things can happen in small towns and rural areas as much as a big city.
Yeah, Sherlock Holmes once said that about the countryside frightens him more than the worst neighborhoods of London. Susan, why don't you share?
Okay. Settings. Bad Bad Seymour Brown takes place on Long Island and in New Brunswick at Rutgers and in Manhattan Beach, which is actually in Brooklyn, which is part of where members of the Russian mob have settled, as well as ordinary, nice, now American citizen Russians, former Russians. So what I choose the setting that calls out to me. I remember as a kid growing up in Brooklyn, I wanted to be a cowgirl, which shows you my, connection to reality. And after, as an adult, having visited Wyoming a few times and just loving it, I set half of a novel Red, White, and Blue in Wyoming. And the best, and I really, that called to me. And the best thing anyone said was someone who grew up on a ranch in Montana. She said, I was looking to see how a New Yorker would mess up the West. And she said, you got it. And that meant more to me than good reviews and all that. I think if you say, I have to know a place. Well, in this case, I didn't know Brighton Beach and the Russian section of Brooklyn that well. And it was in the middle of COVID. And you know what? There's bless the internet, bless the librarians from the Brooklyn Public Library who led me to find old neighborhood newspapers, bless people who were willing, when I called up a drugstore or a shoe store in that area, they were willing to talk to this, for all they knew, insane person who says she was writing a book. And so you can go without going because it's part of your story, or you can go because that's where your heart takes you. Even, having gone to Wyoming, I also have been in World War II Germany in my head. And I visited and I researched it and I felt it. And I felt the fear that my undercover character felt. So the world is yours, you just have to choose what's true and what's right.
Right. And just for the record, I have an uncle who grew up in Washington Heights in Manhattan and did become a cowboy. Actually
cool.
Did. Moved out to us.
Oh, great.
Sarah, why don't you share?
Sure. Yeah, so the Maggie Darcy series is set sort of between Long Island and Ireland. And that that span, sort of the edges of two continents, was a really interesting for me was like a really interesting geographical territory to kind of say, this is it. This is my world. She's between Long Island and Ireland. And one of the things that I really loved about sort of choosing that span was that I was in this series, I'm able to look at it over time, look at these settings over time and how they've changed. The Mountains Wild begins in the 1990s when Maggie first goes to Dublin. And then it picks up again 23 years later when new evidence is found in her cousin's case and she has to go back now as a homicide detective and the mother of a teenage daughter. And I had so much fun exploring how Dublin and how Ireland had changed over those 23 years. And it was very much from my own experience of having lived in Dublin in the 1990s and then sort of going back quite frequently to research these books, as when I was in a completely different place in my life. And of course, so many things had changed for the country and the city. And same for Long Island. I grew up on Long Island, in the 70s and 80s, and my memories of going to the beach and the town I grew up in, and it's a very, very different place now. And I loved exploring kind of the effect of time and societal change and changing economies on setting in these books.
Thank you. Samantha.
Well, much like you, Susan, and like your Uncle Richard, I want to be a cowgirl. So hence my book being set in Texas. No, I grew up in Central Texas in a small town Geronimo and San Marcos, or the real towns, and also a small town in California, and that very much informed Garnett, Texas, which is a fictional town in my books. But you just, I mean, you have to spend so much time in this place when you're writing a novel. And so it had to be somewhere that I really wanted to be in my mind and revisit. I don't live in Texas anymore. I live in Atlanta. And so there's definitely a nostalgia factor for me in writing about small town Texas. And I think that my own feelings about the place and the nostalgia kind of goes hand in hand, I think, with Texas specifically and small towns too, because there's this larger than life mythology about cowgirls in the West, and grandfather was the sheriff, and how does that mythology jive with reality, and kind of again that sense of the past isn't always perfect, and what about what's going on now, and how do you be hopeful for a better future in this town that's kind of degrading, and so that kind of nostalgia and a breakdown of it definitely in my own mind kind of infuses Annie's worldview too of this place. And yeah, so it's definitely a mix of me wanting to go there and having those personal experiences, and me feeling like that small town setting is right for exploring somebody who's figuring out their place in the world.
Right. Okay, I just want to remind everyone, we welcome questions from the audience. Just write them in, and I'm happy to read them off. So just let me know, and I'm happy to pass them on. Also, meanwhile, I want to observe, when we were all reading everybody's books, it was always interesting to see, oh, this kind of reminds me of, I mean, they're all, completely original novels, of course, but, seeing influences over the years is always very interesting. And I know from my own book, people ask who my influence is, and I often say John le Carré, even though I don't write spy thrillers. I just love the way he posted, ethical quandaries in them, even though I write very different kinds of books. So I'd be interested to know what everybody thinks of their greatest influences, and who people are either past or present who influence their works. Susan, why don't you lead off?
I think any good writer is an influence. And so having been a reader with very broad tastes over the years, from science fiction to literary fiction to more than half the books I read are nonfiction, I've gotten a lot, but so I don't think any one writer has molded me. Look, I could say I want to be a modern day Jane Austen, but Jane Austen did Jane Austen in a way I never could. So why bother? For example, Sue Grafton, for whom this award is named, I met her a couple of times. She was just lovely and warm and intelligent. And I liked her. As a person, she was nice. I didn't know her that well. But as a writer, her descriptions of the physical features of characters, just extraordinary. And if you want to kind of describe, say, what somebody looks like, go to Sue Grafton. Likewise, if you want to know about plotting and red herrings and everything, obviously Agatha Christie. Would I want to know her for her racism and anti-Semitism? And no, and I would probably want to punch her in the snoot, although I would refrain. But you pick up little things. But if you go looking for a model, I think you're going to go off. The only thing you own as a writer is your own voice. And you have to be true to that. I wish my voice sounded like Val's, but according to Ancestry.com, I'm 1% Scottish. And I was so excited. I'm gonna figure out, I'm gonna create my own tartan.
1% is a start.
Well, that's just beginning.
Sarah, why don't you share some of your influences?
Sure. Yeah, I think Susan is so right that we all have books we love, and then we have books that taught us something, and sometimes those books are the same things. But yeah, I think I've picked up different little pieces from a lot of the crime fiction that I've loved. When I think about Sue Grafton, I actually wrote when I found out about this nomination, I was so excited because I have this very sentimental connection to Sue Grafton that involves my grandmother, and I actually wrote an essay about how Sue Grafton sort of cemented the literary relationship between me and my grandmother just before my grandmother died. And I think when I think about what it was about those books that really grabbed me and that I've carried forward, it's the sense of Kinsey as a competent, skilled, an excellent detective, and also a vulnerable, flawed, insecure person. And that that sort of combination of a very human detective character and great skill and admirable intelligence and all of those things kind of coming together. I think that so I think Sue Grafton is definitely an inspiration in that way. When I think about the books that I now recommend to people and all read whenever the author has something new come out. I think of somebody like Attica Locke, whose work I just love. I just think she's fantastic. I'll read anything she writes. Same with Tana French. I think it's that combination of characterization and setting that gets me every time. If you're putting those things together.
Great. Okay, just remind everyone you can just type in questions in the Q&A box and I'll read them off. Samantha, who are some of your influences?
Yes, certainly Sue Grafton. There's something about the intimacy of those books that really makes you feel like whenever you pick up a new one, it's really is like you're catching up with an old friend. Not that I necessarily would want to be friends with, Kinsey. Yeah, she's kind of this kind of an out there loner, but there is something just really resonant about her, and that that's always stuck with me. And I think that the kind of that first person voice was definitely a big influence on my writing. Love that series. The Walter Mosley's Easy Rawlins, that's another one I think of, like kind of a voice-driven detective series that I always really love and just feel like you're just picking up midstream. And then also when I was writing these, I was reading a lot of the Elena Ferrante Neapolitan novels, and I think that kind of I love the way that she takes very seriously the internal life of an adolescent young woman, and makes that as this an epic drama of coming of age. I think that was just kind of brilliantly done, and it's something that influenced my thinking about the world and the way I wanted to write. I also, like Sarah, I love Tana French and Attica Locke. And then another little series that I was reading a lot when I was trying to think about what I wanted to do with my books was Sarah Grand's Claire DeWitt series. There's only 3 in the series, but there's just something so compelling about Claire's wit and intelligence, and also the kind of weirdness of those books. They're not really like your traditional PI novel, and I love that they just feel kind of born out of the main character's personal journey. The past is always intruding on the present.
Great.
Yeah.
That's terrific. Thanks. Val, who do you see as your influences?
Well, when I was wanting to start writing a crime fiction back in the ancient mists of the 1980s, in the UK, we really only had two kinds of crime novel. We had the police procedural and the village mystery. I didn't think I knew enough about the way that the police actually did their job to write a police procedure. I mean, years later, I confessed this to Colin Dexter, and he just laughed. And he said, "My dear, I had written 5 Inspector Morse novels before I'd ever set foot in a police station. You just make it up." But I didn't feel comfortable about that. And the other thing was the village mystery. Now, for me, Agatha Christie might as well have been science fiction, because I grew up in Scottish mining villages, which were nothing like St Mary Mead. You know, we did not have retired colonels of the Indian Army. And so I didn't really know how I could write a crime novel. And then the books that changed it for me was really, there were 3 writers, Sarah Paretsky, Sue Grafton, and Barbara Wilson, who were all round about the same time started writing these female private eye novels. And these were women who had a brain and a sense of humor, and they had agency, and they did their own heavy lifting. They didn't have to get the guys in when things got tough. And the other thing about them was that they all had very distinct and identifiable settings. And the crimes that happened because of where the books were set. And this for me was like an epiphany. I thought, this is the kind of book that I want to write. And that's what got me started. So I owe all of them a great debt. And in fact, in the mid-1990s, I wrote a book about real women private eyes called A Suitable Job for a Woman. And during the course of the research for that, I stayed with Sue Grafton in Santa Barbara and with Sarah Paretsky in Chicago. And they were so generous to me, so helpful, such a support in those early days. So that was very important to me. But the thing, of course, is that writers, we're magpies. We steal from everybody. We see the pretty things. We think, that's a clever trick. I could use that. And we also see the things that make us go, I am never going to do that. So it's a continuous process of learning and taking influences and making discoveries along the way. And that's one of the great joys, I think, of the current crop of crime fiction. So much variety, so much range. It's so exciting to pick up a book and be taken to a world you've never been in before, with a kind of character you've never experienced before. And that, for me, compared to what it was when I started out, is absolute paradise.
Great. Great. And Linda?
Let me just preface by saying we have a storm coming and you guys are cutting out just a little bit. So if you lose me, that's probably what's going on. I don't know if anybody knows this, but I actually began my writing career writing romantic suspense. I wrote for Harlequin for several years. I probably did maybe 10 books with them. And I also wrote for Berkeley for a while. I did some romantic suspense. And I have to say, when I was, before I sold my first book, the books that I read had so much power. I was a sponge and I soaked up everything. Some that I remember, Dean Koontz, even though he was known early on for horror and I don't write horror, but I just loved his work. I loved his writing. Unbeknownst to a lot of people, he also did a book on writing many, many years ago, which was wonderful. Pat Conroy. That was just an absolutely beautiful, powerful book that I couldn't get enough. Tammy Hoag. Tammy Hoag is another writer who started out in romance and made her way into the thriller world. Sandra Brown, Nora Roberts, all of them I loved, had just a major impact on me. And I feel like I learned so much. One other thing, and I forget who mentioned it, is that I read a lot of debuts. And I love, there's just a certain passion for that the debut author has. I love to read the big debut novels or any debut novel. I think there's magic there, and it can't be faked, and it's just something I love.
Great. Great, thank you. Well, some questions are beginning to come in, and here's from one participant, from one audience member, who said, "For those of you particularly who don't identify the theme before the book is done, do you ever find the need to go back and focus on the theme during the editing rewrite? That is, do you ever find that the book is going in more than one direction and you need to trim out a secondary theme in order to create a greater focus?" I'll just throw that out there. Who would like to take that?
I could take a real, just a quick one on theme. I think that there are relative themes can be slightly different for different characters in the same book. The theme is somehow related, for example, fitting in or being an outsider or something like that. And I have found many times that when I'm having difficulty with a certain character, sometimes it's because I didn't get it right. And I've never gone back in and changed a theme completely, but sometimes it's an aha moment and I can go back and that will help me fix what I thought needed fixing for a certain character.
I think a lot of it happens by instinct, though. Once you start creating characters and they have their own path and their own voices, they develop themes of their own that relate directly or indirectly to what is the main thrust of the book. And I think that over time you learn how to balance those things so that they're not making the book uneven. A lot of the time it comes down to just patience and practice. And also what you learn from reading other people's books. So often I've been reading something and that's made me think, oh yeah, I could do that, couldn't I? And that would fix it. So it all comes down to just the practice of being a writer. You put the words on the page, but you also take the words in through your eyes.
Mm. Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a sort of magical and unconscious thing that happens too, where sometimes I'll get to the end of a book and I'll say, oh, wow, I didn't realize I was writing about, parents and children in this book. And I go back and I find that, in fact, I kind of left myself some little breadcrumbs that can be expanded to further, to sort of further embroider that theme. And that, I love it when that happens because, you're going back and you're saying, hey, I wasn't as dumb as I thought I was. I actually did that work. And I'm surprised by how often that happens in a book.
I wrote one book years ago, and I got to the end of it, and I really found it unsatisfying. I thought the wrong persons did the murder. They've got a motive, but I'm not very excited by this. It's not very interesting. And I thought, but this other character has a much more interesting motive. Damn, I'm going to have to go back and redo the whole thing. What I didn't understand, I went back, and the only thing I had to do was introduce that character like 50 pages earlier, so they were further into the front of the book. My subconscious knew what they were supposed to be doing. It just hadn't bothered to tell me until I got to the end. I have to fix this.
I like that. Also, someone has asked here if you've ever gotten a message, either an email or a text, or meeting a reader in person who said something that particularly either gratified you or surprised you about your books, your characters, or your themes.
Oh yeah. Well, first the best one was someone who came out. I was on a book tour up in Denver, and someone came up to me and said, "Oh, I loved what you said, and I'm so glad that you're not dead." And I said, "Well, I am too." And then they said, because if you were, there wouldn't be another book. And I understand that it really, I found it very touching because, she wanted to continue the character. She wanted to continue being part of that life. And the other thing, when I first talked about themes, you said, what are your themes? So I thought, what are my themes? And I gave them to you. But actually, I don't think in that kind of cerebral way as I'm writing. I mean, as many of you said, it kind of emerges later. But readers have come up to me and spoken to me about my themes or asked me about my relationship with my mother and my father, or whatever. And they have found in my books something that my non-conscious mind may have known really well, but that I was blissfully unaware of.
I had one experience that I'm not quite sure whether it's gratifying or terrifying. The first Tony Hill and Carol Jordan book I wrote, which is another series that I have, has some very dark scenes of torture in it. And on two separate occasions, two women completely unconnected to each other have told me that they were late in delivering their baby, and that they were reading The Mermaid Singing, and that sent them into labor. I think you're offering it to midwives as a help to make babies, make deliveries.
That's amazing. I recently somebody emailed me and said that, or they were asking my permission to get a line from my first book as a tattoo. And I was just really incredibly honored that somebody would want a line from my book in such a permanent place. But also, it just was kind of it was my first book. And so I was just really like, I don't know, it became clear to me that this very private endeavor that I'd spent so much time on alone in a room, it's not just completely mine anymore. It's somebody else's too. And the way that I, enjoy other people's books and they mean something to me, and feeling kind of part of that bigger conversation was just a really cool moment for me, and hope to continue being able to do that.
What was the line?
It was from Pay Dirt Road, and it was now I'm like blanking on, I know which line it is. It's about feeling like you're always about to lose somebody is a textured kind of sadness, and that's what love is. Something along those lines.
I personally, I love when people sort of connect reading one of my books with an important moment in their lives. I've had people come up to me and say, "Oh, I was reading your book on my honeymoon," and I'll always connect Maggie with being on my honeymoon, or sometimes it's much sadder. Someone will say, "I was reading your book when my father was dying in the hospital," but I'll always sort of connect you with that very complicated time. And and I sort of love that, because it's completely separate from how good they thought the book was, or how much they liked it even. But it's just this idea of books as companions, and that we as writers, most of us are passionate readers too. And I think in some ways that's the highest compliment, that that book was a companion during an important or a difficult moment.
Yeah, Sarah, just to add to that, sometimes when you have a long running series, people, sometimes readers, and writers too, we come to see those characters as family, people that we know. And I had a lady send me an email once that she basically told me that the Kate Burkholder books got her through chemo.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really, really something really cool.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, thanks everyone here. I'd love to continue. It takes you just about out of time. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. I mean, you gave, from a purely selfish reason, I feel I got so many more ideas now myself. It really helped me. Also want to say everyone can join us this Wednesday for a conversation with the nominees of the Best Critical Biographical. I was a judge on that some years ago, so I know that'll be exciting. You can find out more by visiting mysterywriters.org, and tune into the live broadcast of the awards ceremony on May 1st. Well, I will be there in person. Thank you all very much.
All right.
Take
Thank
care.